Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. I'm David Herle, and with me is our political panel, coming at you a day late after the long Thanksgiving weekend. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and Kory Teneycke. Let's get right to it, because although it was a time of giving thanks in Canada, it was brutal in other parts of the world. We'll start there, with a discussion on Israel and Hamas and the domestic politics here at home. Our cursed clipping this week is from CBC News. NDP warhorse Ed Broadbent, in an interview on Rosemary Barton Live, said Jagmeet Singh should have pushed for a shorter supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals. Minister Champagne was out last week announcing a set of measures with the 5 major grocery chains to stabilize prices and bring down food inflation. Meanwhile, Poilievre was roasting the Liberals all weekend long over the price of turkey, the politics, and the price of food. And finally, the great Gordon Pinson from Somewhere Beyond will call for our hey yous. Kory, Scott, Jordan, we had a hell of a time in New Brunswick last week, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, that was so great.
Did.
The Canada Pension and Benefits people, thanks for having us out. Kory, first in line at the drag show. I did not predict that.
Absolutely. Yeah, out of his seat, like a shot out of a Dolly Parton cannon.
Well, it was interesting that we were the opening act for a drag show. Like, when we've made it big time, really truly big time, we'll have drag queens opening our show as opposed to the other way around.
Yes.
We're not worthy.
We're not. I think we'd have to organize that ourselves.
There is no definition of success more fundamental to my wishes than standing on a stage and singing Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves by Cher. Like, when that happens, I will know I have filled all of my wildest dreams.
Yeah, but that wasn't the song they were playing, Scott. And I think there's an admission that you have to make here to people who think you are some sort of Bob Dylan, John Prine, folk rock savant, right? Okay. You love fucking disco music. You love disco music. You were up there pumping your arms, singing away, Donna Summer, Sister Sledge. You were there.
No, I like disco music, but I love giant black men dressed as women. So that's what drew me.
Actually, what I saw was that, as is completely appropriate, Scott's like most enthusiastic reaction was the Dolly Parton act. It was amazing. It was so good. It was
it's such a good idea. 6'4" Dolly.
Nothing
more
that
Dolly.
My heart
Who's not
more
for that?
Than all of these like wonderful buttoned up pension professionals getting down on the dance floor with a bunch of drag queens. It was beautiful.
I know.
Well, you almost got a gift.
Kory left his wife sitting at the table to go dance with the dairy queens.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, we found you almost got a gift out of it, Scott. We found a calendar of cats dressed up as celebrities, and there was right on the cover a cat dressed up as Dolly Parton. Could be adorning.
Well, I like Dolly, but you have to say I'm anti-cat. So,
all right, let's take this down about 100 fucking notches.
Yeah.
All right. So last week, while we were out in New Brunswick, the terrorist group Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip, killing hundreds, wounding more, kidnapping perhaps more than 100 people. Israel, surprisingly caught unawares, has responded with devastating consequences in Gaza. More to come. Bob Ray says Iran was involved. Some suspect Russia as well. Demonstrations sprung up around Canada supporting the Hamas attack. Canadian politicians virtually unanimously condemned the attack on Israel, but Canada is not invited to make a joint statement with the U.S. and Western Europe. Lots to discuss here. Scott, what's on your mind about this?
Well, my mind, it's not much of a political analysis, and I lack the, geopolitical sophistication to know what comes next. I suspect nothing good. So what dominoes begin to fall? How does Iran get sucked into this? Do we see that, a new war cabinet, new unity government in Israel with the strong backing of the West? Does it feel that it's got the moral authority and the geopolitical backing to launch a direct attack on Lebanon, a direct attack on Iran, obviously, then that causes dominoes to fall. So I'm thinking about all those things. But I got to tell you, in all honesty, I spent the whole weekend thinking about hostages. Like, I just kept thinking about that. So that's not a political piece of analysis. It's not a sophisticated piece of analysis. I just kept thinking. I saw this interview with a man whose daughter was on the phone while her 2 children hid in a closet. The children survived, on the phone with his daughter as she dies. And I just, and then they take the kids. And so, and you think about the music festival, and you saw kids being let out of that music festival. And then, of course, they found that what happened to the balance of them, 260 massacred. I just kept thinking about those, about the sausages. I thought about All Day Saturday. Then, of course, when they started to unleash the counterattack, you start thinking, well, what does that mean? Where are they going to go? Then Hamas is out there saying, we're going to start executing one hostage for every bomb that drops on us. And I just live in real fear that that's going to start to occur. So I don't know. That's not getting us off to either a very pleasant or political start. But that's what I thought about all weekend. I thought about the hostages and just how goddamn awful it is.
Stay with the same question, Jordan. What's on your mind about this?
Yeah, I mean, not dissimilar to Scott. I think my first reaction is hopefully a human one. The level of tragedy and horror of these attacks is almost unthinkable. And I think right now, speaking to friends who are Jewish Canadian, friends who are Palestinian Canadian, they are everyone is united in being terrified and devastated and truly, truly afraid of what is to come. And I think that when I consider what is going to happen here, we are at the beginning of, I think, a really very terrible and dark period. And it's grief, right? It's grief and fear. And so that is really what has been on my mind. And I think in terms of political impacts in Canada, not a lot directly. Voters, most Canadian voters, I think on this, it would be fair to say, want moral clarity from their leaders in condemning these attacks from Hamas, and they got that. All the mainstream parties were equally strong in condemning the terrorism. For people who pay close attention to the issue, a lot of them will have entrenched views about what they want to see in statements, and some people may have partisanship around that, but I think that that's a pretty small group of people. I think the biggest impacts in terms of Canadian politics of this will be the geopolitical ones. So if we see Hezbollah and Lebanon pulled in, if we see Iran pulled in, if we see Syria use this to make a move in the Golan or within Syria itself, the involvement of Russia and Ukraine, we could obviously see serious impacts on oil prices that will have economic effects that will be far-reaching here in Canada. I think the other thing we saw this weekend is the power of disinformation and the failure of some web giants to take that on. So Twitter was kind of a disaster on disinformation this weekend. And whereas I think if in past conflicts, that had been a place where people would go to be informed.
But now you can't go there to find out what's going on, can you?
That's right. You
can't get news. You can't get clear. So you got to, it's like a kickback to another time. You got to go to CNN.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are all of the things I think about. And it's fucking awful and tragic. And this is full stop, a horrific tragedy for Jews and Israelis around the world. And there's also incredible tragedy that is visiting Palestinian civilians in Gaza right now. And we're going to see more of it.
Hamas anticipated that, though, correct?
Well, yes. And I think that it's really important to recognize here that Palestinian civilians in Gaza are also victims of Hamas. And this is part of that dynamic. And this is a very, very small place with more than 2 million civilians in it, half of which are children. There's not a lot of places to go there. And when there is a complete cutting off of supplies, fuel, food, there are going to be incredible, disastrous humanitarian consequences to that. And that's going to be part of what is playing out here. So, yeah, I think it's horror. It's horror.
Right. That was the game, though, right, Kory, on Hamas's part? Not to use game in a shitty way, but that was the play on their part, which is they're not going to defeat Israel militarily, but they're trying to create a situation that brings other people into the fight and inflames the Western world against Israel.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think what primarily the staging of this was about is to try to prevent a deal with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think that's very much not in the interest of Iran. And I think that the decision to try to derail that normalization of relationships with Israel and other Arab states is what's driving this. The Palestinians feel like they're being left behind, and Hamas is pulling the fire alarm in a way to refocus attention and hopefully stop some of those agreements from happening. And from their point of view, but I think they've so misplayed this that they're going to be utterly destroyed going through this, because I don't think there's another viable option. It's terrible when war happens. War is like the most inconceivably brutal thing that humans can do to other humans. But we know that sometimes it's necessary. And, I look to World War I, I look to World War II, I look to many, our conflict against ISIS and the sort of barbarism that went on there that required a response from the rest of the world. And, think back to World War II. In order to stop the Nazis and the Holocaust and restore borders in Europe, we had to kill millions of people. Like, we firebombed Dresden. We dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There are a lot of really, really terrible things that happened, and a lot of civilian death that happened to get to an outcome where you had a 50-year era of peace and stability in the world. And there can be no peace with Hamas. There just can't, unfortunately. And so I think Israel is being put in a position where it has no choice but to respond with overwhelming force to change the reality on the ground and to remove these absolutely barbarous, murderous bastards from positions of power and ultimately from existence on planet Earth. Like, it's just not, you cannot have that sort of stuff happening in your country and not respond to protect your citizens. Just impossible.
Hey, Jordan, you're a foreign policy expert. Can I ask you, I was just sitting around last night and stumbled across this statement by everybody in the G7 but Canada and Japan, issuing a statement of solidarity about Israel. Why would Canada not be part of that?
So that group is a group called the Quant, and they from time to time do issue statements that don't involve Canada or Japan. So I don't think it's actually that.
But why would, in this instance, would they?
I think in reading that statement, if you read the statement, this is really about sending signal to Iran. That's what that statement was about. And we're irrelevant to that. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that there is a larger thought to be had here about what is Canada's role in this, really. Our position on the international stage is certainly diminished from what it was 20, 30 years ago, and our voice in these things is not as loud as it once was. But in this particular arrangement of states making a statement, I'm not surprised not to see Canada be a part of that. You've got, and on the Iran question, it's very interesting. There's a lot of careful talk happening globally in the US, in Israel, elsewhere about Iran's involvement or non-involvement. And it was interesting to see the Foreign Affairs Minister Joly and Ambassador to the UN Bob Ray a little bit offside with each other this weekend, where you had Ray coming out and saying that Iran was certainly involved, and Joly taking a much more cautious tact on that. So I think really what's happening now is a lot of international, I won't even say dialogue, but diplomatic language that's aimed at sending a clear message to Iran, cautioning about any broadening of this conflict or taking advantage of Israel's involvement to launch any other type of an attack.
Yeah, Bob is from the Say What's on Your Mind school of diplomacy. Eh?
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's not just him, but I don't think he's out on a limb there. Like, Hamas is being funded by Iran forever. So, it's not a question of their involvement. It's how direct and how
that's right.
Involved in the actual, planning of the specific operation. But it's difficult to believe that the country that largely finances Hamas was not aware or not involved. Like, it's that you're straining credulity when people are not clear about that. So what? Are there going to be strikes against Iran? I don't know. Probably no one on this podcast is in a particularly great.
Well, I can't say I'm not in a position to share that information with you, Gordon.
But if we want to talk more about the politics, I think it's interesting that Olivia Chow was booed at the Israel rally in Dundas Square last night, and I think where there is political vulnerability, it largely is with the NDP right now, who've been a little bit more on the Palestinian side of the ledger in the past, and are more prone to talk about root causes and sort of weasel words around this stuff. So I think there's vulnerability. Now that vulnerability may reverse as operations and things continue. I think if this follows the same sort of course that we've seen in the past, there'll be big sympathy for Israel and its right to strike back in the early days of this, and that will slowly erode over time.
People won't like the strike back.
Yeah, the strike back will create another dynamic. But in the initial hours and days after this, I think the fact that Chow was being booed is not super surprising, and I think you're going to see that kind of stuff. Okay, I remember was it Sven Robinson when he was talking about wanting to negotiate with the Taliban way back when? Like there's sort of a softness on this stuff on the NDP side that has tended to bite them in these initial stages, and maybe plays better for them as conflicts continue over time. But right now, I don't think there's major domestic political things that are moved or affected by this, other than just the sort of collective horror that you guys expressed earlier, and I think that we're all feeling. It's brutal to see, but these kinds of attacks. But I don't see a lot of politics moving around in Canada on this.
For those of you who follow what's going on in tech spaces, these last 10 or 11 months have been dominated by one major headline: generative AI. If you've somehow missed the 3,000,001 articles and news stories about it, here's a primer. Gen AI can synthesize text and voice, write ad copy, not this one, mind you, create photos, and even compose its own music, according to the inputs you feed it. More than a little revolutionary, eh? Maybe you've noticed your industrious friends at Air Quotes Media use it to create our weekly Twitter visuals for Cursive Politics. Yeah, I still call it Twitter. Sue me, Elon. Gen AI has smartly positioned itself as a way to save time and jumpstart ideas. Our experience would bear that out. But a lot of people have genuine fears about its biases, its ability to propagate misinformation, intellectual property and copyright infringement, as well as security and privacy concerns. So a couple of weeks ago, the federal government introduced a shiny new voluntary code of conduct for generative AI to quell some of those fears. All signatories to the code commit to achieve these things: transparency, fairness and equity, safety, accountability, as well as human oversight and monitoring in all Gen AI programming development. Why am I even talking about this? Well, for a number of weeks now, I've been telling stories here about how our presenting sponsor, TELUS, invests in groundbreaking technologies, over $240 billion since the turn of the millennium, with the focus squarely on innovation and expanding services. Not a surprise then that TELUS became the first and only telecom to sign on to the new AI Code of Conduct, with their sights set firmly on fair, equitable, and responsible use. Hurly-burlyites, you know that with most things, but especially on investing in items with social purpose, TELUS likes to be first. Put simply, TELUS believes the transformative power of AI, when used appropriately, is going to produce better outcomes in so many aspects of our lives. Maybe the best way to sum it all up? It'll help make the future friendly. Jordan, I'll continue come in a second on that, but I want to hear from Scott, because Kory's raised this, and there is some domestic politics in this. I don't know how powerful it is, but I do know that the Conservative Party is always anxious to make sure that everybody knows that it's the only political party that Israel can actually rely on. The Conservatives are always looking for comparative advantage vis-a-vis the other parties whenever there's an issue like this. And again, they were this weekend out there slamming Trudeau for being late in making a statement, etc. And then there's the NDP. Chow put out a statement that she had to withdraw and replace with something else because it was too even-handed, I guess. This is, I think, a more difficult issue for the NDP to manage internally than it is for the other parties, because there is a lot of sympathy for the Palestinian cause among NDP militants. Scott, your thoughts on the domestic politics?
Well, I do think they exist. And, I think I agree with Kory in that the NDP, because of where they've been traditionally on this issue, will find it harder to instinctively hashtag themselves a stand with Israel, but that's happened because of the intensity of the attacks and the absolute indefensibility of what occurred. So you got a statement like that from Olivia Chow, which I disliked as much as many, but you also got a withdrawn, and you got an unequivocal statement from her at the microphone. You got an absolutely unequivocal statement from her with respect to the unsanctioned rallies in favor of Hamas, where people are screaming, like death to Jews and so forth. And I've seen many people say, well, that's not a fair characterization of those rallies. And, sorry. I think the politics will grow more intense. I have not liked them. I mean, my attitude is until and unless there is one of two things. One, explicit evidence, not just, that initial statement, which is flawed, but until and unless there's explicit evidence of somebody being completely offside on this stuff where it merits real isolation and discussion, I think everybody at the political level stand by the consensus that Canada is a friend of Israel, that Canada defends Israel's right to defend itself, and condemns Hamas as a terrorist organization. And so, all this sort of, like, you see cheap bullshit happening, mostly on the fringes, to be fair, like mostly around the edges of these issues. Why isn't, like, one that really got up my ass is, why isn't the mission open? That's not true. The mission was open. All this stuff about, well, they've got a 1-800 number. Does that mean that the phones are off the hook? No, it means it's a fucking hotline for consular services. So that kind of cheap, looking for advantage, I hate that shit. I think that we need...
Vivian, the former ambassador, she really hated being fired, eh?
Yeah. And, she's got her own things going down there.
Yeah.
On top of that, though, I think that's the first thing, where if somebody steps outside of that consensus, then I think they should rightly be called out. And I think you see people either absolutely in that consensus, or if it was awkward, they're scrambling to get inside of it. So let's let everybody stay in that consensus and not try to add partisan fire to that. But the domestic politics do exist, and they will intensify as we move. And both Jordan and Kory hinted at this as we move from standing with Israel in defense of them due to this horrifying attack to what's going to happen next. And it's just the more it continues and the more fallout is, there's going to be economic fallout with the price of oil and all of that implies. There's going to be obviously horrifying fallout with respect to the counterattack because, you're going to get awful stories about Palestinian innocents are going to be just wiped out. It's almost inherent to what's happening here. You're going to see what happens. Does Iran get, drawn into this stuff? The Quint was issuing that statement because they're Western powers who either have nuclear weapons or they host nuclear weapons, and that's been their role. So that's a nuclear weapon. If anybody out there
listening is feeling inadequate, I have never heard of the term the Quint before yesterday.
Right. Well, it's who would? Like, why? Right. Unless you served in government, unless you're, a foreign policy expert. But all I was going to say, and I'll wrap up, all I was going to say is that the politics of this will become more challenging because you'll have counterattacks. You're going to have, events like who is playing at what level diplomatically. Then, then the government's going to get attacked. Why aren't we, in this statement? Why aren't we doing this? You're going to get real tension as diasporas raise their voices, and you're going to see some breakdown of consensus in terms of domestic politics here, and based on constituency and affiliation with diaspora. And you're going to see, we start talking about borders because literally, you're going to talk about. At some point, it starts becoming about those things. So it bleeds over into borders. It bleeds over into Russia. What was its involvement? All of this sort of stuff. And so the politics are going to become more complicated every minute that this continues, every hour that this continues, every day that this continues. And it won't we'll live through a period where the only right answer is to be with Israel. And then we're going to live through a period where that consensus is going to get tested badly, and it's going to become more complex and more awkward. And that's going to take some real sophistication and maturity on the part of all political leaders.
Okay, Jordan, take a moment to respond to what's been said since you last intervened. But also, if you could, give us a sense of what you think we should be looking to Minister Joly for in the coming days and weeks. What do we want out of our Foreign Affairs Minister?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to respond to the points that were brought up, and, I think particularly what Kory's saying, yes, I mean, Olivia's initial statement that I think was more clumsy than necessarily wrong in content. And it speaks to the pressure and the difficulty of issuing statements in this kind of environment. And I think we've all been involved in that, where these are texts that get like a closer reading than the Bible in these high pressure moments when they come out. And sometimes people don't get it right off the bat. And she wasn't the only one across Canada who experienced that over the weekend. I think this issue and the conflict in the Middle East more broadly, this is a difficult issue for New Democrats. This is a closely felt issue for many people in the party. There are many activists who have spent their lives working in solidarity with Palestinian civilians and who have particular concern with conditions in Gaza. There are many, many progressive Jewish Canadians who are members of the party and who really were heart-stricken this weekend to see people that they've stood shoulder to shoulder with on other types of struggles for justice, kind of appearing a bit on the opposite side of this one. And so it is a hard and heartfelt issue for New Democrats. I think that Singh's statement and the foreign affairs critic Heather McPherson, I think they did a very good job. And actually, if you haven't had a chance to read it, I think it's worth everybody reading. It is a long statement, which is unusual in these circumstances. And it is unequivocal in its condemnation of Hamas. But it does also speak about the importance of Israel adhering to international law. In its response, it does speak about the conditions of civilians in Gaza, and it does talk about the enormous human cost that's going to occur. And I think that those are important things. And so whether this is difficult for the NDP, I think there's no question that it is. But I think that there's also a level of maturity in the party leadership about how to speak about the issue and how to think about it internally. And I'd also note that the leadership broadly across the country of New Democrats was fairly united in their response. Singh, Eby, Wab Kinew, and Olivia's final statement. There's not a lot of distance between these. So while I do think that this issue is going to be very close to the heart of many New Democrats, and there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations within our movement over the next few weeks, I don't think that the NDP writ large has broken with Canadian consensus in any way. And in actual fact, I think that the statements that they are putting out are a fuller reflection of some of the complexities that are to come. Now, can I just say something to you? Sure. And you can tell me I'm full of shit. But actually, the NDP leadership is the most politically courageous on this because they are standing in solidarity with Israel, despite the fact that probably most of their supporters and militants do not agree. Yeah, this is really hard. And I think when we talk about supporters and militants, that's these are our friends and colleagues, and this is hard stuff. This is hard stuff with real costs. And I think that there are a lot of armchair generals here in Canada and a lot of armchair activists, and that makes the conversation a difficult one. I think I have to personally, as a New Democrat, as somebody who supports the existence of the state of Israel, but has deep, deep, deep concerns about the conditions of Palestinian civilians, I found that statement spoke to the issues, but it also spoke to just the gut-wrenching feeling that a lot of people are having. And that's a really hard thing to do in a political statement. So I think that the team and the leadership there should feel generally pretty good about how they came through this weekend. Now for Joly, I think really what Canada's work here is in working with our allies to support obviously Israel in dealing with the fallout from these horrible attacks and in securing itself, but in securing itself in a way that is in respect of international law. And that's something that I think as things unfold, we are going to need to hear more from our Foreign Affairs Minister on.
Okay. Kory, last word goes to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what in accordance with international law means. Like, international law is pretty nebulous, but
no, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear on this stuff.
I disagree, and what ultimately happens is what I ultimately think is going to happen is Israel is going to do whatever it takes to change the regime in Gaza, and I don't think it has a choice, and so I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But I think the operation is going to look a lot more like what we saw going on with ISIS, where it's going to be absolutely brutal, and people, as jarring as images we've seen, I think are going to need to brace themselves for more of the same. I think we'll see execution of hostages. I think we're going to see civilian deaths as a part of military operations, which, by the way, if we're talking about, international law, if you're going to be launching rockets from a crowded apartment building full of civilians and children, or from a school or whatever, it's on you when the bomb lands on that building and kills all those people, along with the militants launching those rockets. It's using civilians as cover to launch barbarous military attacks is something that has been tolerated by Israel, I think, more than was probably wise. But I don't think those kinds of restraints are going to be in play. I think stabilizing the situation by removing Hamas is what's going to be the defining feature of this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's presume we'll be back to this in subsequent weeks. So I found myself gazing at a landline phone the other day. The modern successor to the black, bakelite, rotary dial appliance that dragged the world into the modern era of communications. Plugs into the wall, has a dial tone, etc. It occurred to me that it's a slowly vanishing creature, perfectly functional and still quite useful, but outclassed by its sleek, wireless 5G cousins. I mean, cell phones have come an awfully long way since those enormous gray things with the stubby antenna we used to call shoe phones back in the 80s. A lot of tech is in the same sort of transition period right now, and will be for some time to come. Cars, airplanes, even trains. Yes, trains. Locomotives might look alike, but our sponsor CN will tell you that there's a vast difference between the behemoths that have pulled trains for decades and their modern counterparts. The older ones run on DC or direct current. The new ones are AC, alternating current. The details of the difference are pretty complicated, mostly to do with the laws of physics. But put it this way, AC locomotives have a lot more oomph. They can pull heavier loads, getting up to cruising speed much faster. And they're way lighter. AC locomotives are also a lot more reliable. So CN, which is constantly reinvesting in its equipment and infrastructure, has been going for AC. CN's new winter plan states that AC locomotives now comprise about 55% of the railway's fleet. More or less the same can be said for the thousands of newer, higher capacity hopper cars used to move grain. That's the way of things. By purchasing better, stronger, more efficient technology, CN stays ahead of the competition, which is good for its customers. And I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating. CN trains leave the station on time and arrive on time, period. Our clipping of the day. Music, please. Our clipping of the day comes to us from the CBC, and it's about an interview that Ed Broadbent did with Rosemary Barton. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh should have pushed for a supply and confidence agreement with the Liberal government that was a year shorter said former NDP leader, fossil, and social democratic stalwart. Oh, they didn't have that in there. Ed Broadbent.
Oh, unkind.
Not a bit. Here, David.
It's a getting credit issue, he told CBC chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton of The Deal. The good things that are there, and there are many good things, Liberals, of course, will be taking credit. It's a matter of having time for us, for the NDP, to make its voice known. So maybe if the agreement were a year shorter, it might be a little bit better. Kory, sounds to me like people inside the NDP are thinking this confidence and supply agreement might end badly for the NDP, as we have speculated on this pod before.
Well, I think 3/4 of us most days think it's a bad idea. Look, I don't know, why the NDP doesn't just hold the government ransom on every budget, on every financial bill. Punch through with a lot more debate over, what will they, won't they, will they support this? What are they getting out of it? But you can do that in real time, one measure at a time, and I think you get better outcomes. And it doesn't look like you're almost unconditionally propping up the government, which is how I think the confidence and supply agreement gets more often characterized when it's talked about at all. It takes all the drama out of the situation to have that in place. Look, I agree with the fossil.
Scott, this confidence supply agreement, as Kory says, is 100% different than what Leighton did to us. I mean, Leighton did exactly what Kory's saying, which is, you want to pass this budget, you're going to put shit in it I want. And it's going to be clear to Canadians that I got it in there because you didn't have it. And it's a big fight now. And then at the end of the day, it'll be in there.
Yeah. And I don't think Leighton's approach worked. I don't think that people credited him with that. In 2011, he had a huge electoral breakthrough. And I don't think, despite all the rationalizations you hear from our NDP friends, that it had sweet fuck all to do with those budgets. We got this and we got that. I've never bought that. I don't buy it now.
Wait a second. I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think it helped them. I think it made us look weak.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. It helped. It helped harm us in 2006. I don't think it helped them in 2006, 2008, or 2011. I agree. I disagree with the fossil. As soon as you get past the top level, like, is the CNS agreement, has it become a set of handcuffs on the NDP? Yeah, it has. But I don't. Like, first of all, it's high. I'm Ed Broadbent. I'm cranky. Point number 2, I would have done better. Point number 3, his point number 3 is it should be 1 year less so that you have, his argument is so you then have a year before the next election to market yourself. And it's like, well, that doesn't actually make sense because you wouldn't necessarily have a year. If you disrupt the CNS agreement, chances are the government's going to fail. So, and the implicit notion that, well, then you'll be able to spend a year selling all of your achievements and bolstering yourself. It all comes back to the same point, which is that this thing is not an electoral strategy. It is only the CNS agreement. It is only an electoral strategy insofar as it helps to pinpoint the election and it puts that date further in the future. But it's not an electoral strategy. I don't believe that it reaps a bunch of benefits for the NDP, even if they gain in seats, even if the Liberals collapse on the next election, they leapfrog. I don't think it will be because of this. I think the truth of the matter is that it's a policy strategy. It's let's rack up these things, we'll set off the election, and then we see what happens. And I just don't I don't know. It's just a ghost of Christmas past coming back to sort of say, yes, you miss Nell and you had a terrible Christmas that time at school when your parents didn't come to collect you. But we all know, that Ebenezer Scrooge in real life doesn't turn into a great old man who gives away all his money. So I just don't think, the ghost of Christmas past here is contributing much. Other than, I guess, maybe reflecting a growing realization that this thing isn't necessarily going to work for them. But the NDP who orchestrated this agreement knew that, and they've known it. So they can, rejig it or all that kind of stuff. They've still got the Liberals by the balls. If they want to say we're going to withdraw it unless you do this or that, they can yell about pharmacare. I don't even think that's electorally beneficial for them. They're going to yell about a thing that's not going to help them win votes or the government win votes. but whatever have you. So I kind of.
Well, I presume the Conservatives would love nothing more than to have the Liberals and the NDP spend the next 2 years fighting over who gets credit for the dental care program. But Jordan, I think it's your time to jump in here. But I'm going to lead you off with a question, which is Ed Broadbent led the NDP 50 fucking years ago. 50 fucking years ago. Why does he think he should wander up to a microphone and opine on the current leadership of the NDP?
Jesus. You guys, Ed Broadbent is a great. And if you think Ed Broadbent is not a great, I look forward to you inviting Ed on your show to talk about these things, because I think that Ed's influence on Canadian politics.
I'll invite Rick Mahoney on before I invite Ed Broadbent.
Yeah, well, that's your first fucking problem right there.
Can you bring Joe Oliver on with him? Because I would pay any amount of money to watch an old guy fist fight. Joe Oliver v. Ed Broadbent. Listen.
The whining that I'm hearing here is just music to my ears. I call bull fucking shit on all of you for a few things. So first of all, anyways, Ed has every right to come out and speak, as he frequently does. And P.S., what you guys have pulled out of this article, I think let's not torque up too much what was like a pretty gentle observation that Ed made in a broader interview, and where he's also, by the way, described the confidence and supply agreement as the greatest achievement of any NDP federal leader ever. So I think you can't characterize Ed as being in any way opposed to this agreement. He recognizes the value of it for the party. And,
David Lewis got FIRA and Petro-Canada.
Well, who knows what Singh's going to get? It ain't over yet, friends.
Right.
And that brings me to my next point. So before this, and you speak to this, the NDP had a single budget vote where they were able to concretely exact things from the Liberals, and there was policy influence beyond that. This agreement gives the party tangible wins over a much longer time frame, where they are in a position of power to squeeze the ever-loving shit out of the Liberals. The further their numbers go down in the polls, the greater that squeeze will become. I think with respect to the length of the agreement, look, when that agreement was negotiated, I do not expect that the Liberals offered the NDP an endless option of timeframes for that agreement. In fact, I'm sure that they did not. I'm sure that they come and that with a list of 26% potential things that they wanted to do together, I think the price of that was 2025. Now, that said, obviously, New Democrats can leave this agreement at any time that they feel that it's electorally or politically advantageous to do so. So I think that let's not overstate what the significance of the written length of the agreement is when we live in a world of realpolitik. And I would say that Ed's suggestion or thought here about the length of the agreement is also an argument to consider a refreshed 2.0 agreement, which we've talked about many times here. But some of that is about inserting the NDP into the story, in the driver's seat, and making sure that they are able to capitalize on some of the influence that they're having. And the last thing that I'm going to say here is that for all of the whinging and complaining that we hear here about how Leighton's agreement had no influence and blah, 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 I'm going to point out that 7 years later, between Paul Martin and Leighton, one of them was hitting the former PM speaker circuit, and one of them was leader of the official opposition. So I think the results speak for themselves there, and I have no doubt that they're ultimately going to do the same here.
Kaboom, Scott!
Well,
Kaboom.
I guess,
Okay.
I would just say this. I think all fine points, a very spirited defense, but I would say that Ed's objective in coming out was threefold. Me. I would have been better. I am better. I'd have done it better. It's cranky old man-itis. Come on. We can walk around that and say, we put him on the mantelpiece. He's one of the giants. He's a Mount Rushmore in the New Democratic Movement. Me, and me.
Well, Ed was a master, right? Because Ed supported the Liberals in taking down the Clark government, and he negotiated strongly on that. He got nothing. And then Ed supported Trudeau on the constitutional patriation, and he negotiated well on that because he got nothing. So he was pretty tough when he was there.
I detect some sore feelings, friends.
All right. Our last topic today, food prices. Food prices. And food insecurity. There's a lot of families. This is not an academic issue. I have survey research that says that the number of Canadians who say that they're very worried about their ability to feed their families has grown by 2.5 times over the last 3 years. And is in the low 20s now. That's how many Canadians describe themselves as being in a situation where they're worried about that. So this is a pretty big deal out there. So there was some politics about this. At their caucus meeting, where they determined that they were going to be all about affordability, the Liberals announced that they were going to be getting tough with the grocers. And there was real tough talk that day about profit taxes and regulations and tough meetings and all kinds of things. Well, there have been 2 meetings since then. Neither of them looked tough to me. The grocery execs did not look chastened as they left their meeting with Minister Champagne either time. Last meeting, the grocery execs met. There was no plan to reduce prices. The executives, as I could tell, made no promises. Champagne insisted that something will happen to prices. Jordan, this just looks to me like a really, really badly thought out effort at political grandstanding. I don't know what the government's end game is on this. They started something and now they look weak.
It's even worse than that.
They wanted to look strong and they look weak.
It's worse than that. They started something, they set a due date for it, and then set themselves up to look completely weak when that due date arrives. So it was
a stretch goal. I love that line. It was a stretch goal.
Jesus. Yeah, I had trouble paying my hydro bills this month. It was a stretch goal. So better luck next month. Like, what a fucking joke. No, this is a terrible setup by the Liberals, terrible execution. And really, like, what it comes down to is that it's more meetings to have another plan. They brought the CEOs together of these grocery companies that are taking in record profits, and they've asked them very, very nicely to not even lower prices, to stabilize prices. So even if they get the win that they're asking for, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and suggest that most people are going to think that is just completely inadequate when we've had 2 years of food prices rising faster than inflation. So that is 2 years where this has been a demonstrable issue. And just the solution is so wholly inadequate, both from a policy perspective and also from a political perspective. And the thing that really gets me about it is that it's like entirely an own goal. Like, they chose the setup. They chose the setup on this. They chose the meeting. They chose the due date. They chose to accept that each individual grocer is going to come with their own, like, super secret price stabilization plan that no one can really know about because competition, because that's going so well. And I just think most Canadians are going to look at this and say this is completely useless. I think they have handed back to the NDP and back to Singh an incredibly powerful issue. And I think that you're going to see the NDP run with it, because it's clear that the Liberals don't have any stomach to do some of the things that might be required to actually pull down prices. And they're not meeting the moment. And the lack of cohesive communication strategy around this is utterly baffling.
Kory, watching these discussions with the grocers, I'm starting to get the idea of how we paid $67 billion to Volkswagen.
Right. I don't know. Our initial comment, as I seem to recall, was that when this was announced, was that it was bullshit theater, and I think it's proven itself to be exactly that. There's only one party that's benefiting from its messaging around these cost of living issues, and that's Poilievre and the Conservatives. I find it humorous watching Minister Champagne, with the lifts in his shoes, jumping up and down with a very acute and public display of small man syndrome, talking about how he's He is going to be very, very, very tough. Very tough. Look how tough I am. I'm going to come in and yell at all of these guys to lower their prices, and they won't mess with me because I'm the big, powerful minister. It's just, it's farcical. It looks like a Looney Tunes Does Politics display.
Where is the space modulator?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I find the whole thing self-defeating in terms of its ineffectiveness, and from a communication standpoint. It's laying out a process with no measurable goal at the end of it. Like, you're not going to be able to point to anything done in this process to say, hey, groceries went from X to X minus. Whereas Poilievre has a very clear message around carbon tax, where it's, you can put a number on it. And it's immediate, and you can get the credit for it as the person who did it, or you can accept the blame for it as the person who didn't do it. But like, it's quantifiable, it's politically poignant, it's easily understood, it's transparent in terms of the outcomes that it provides, and all of this stuff, all this bullshit theater, small man, tough guy performance looks totally ineffective to me.
All right, Scott, you're the master tactician. How is this playing out?
Yeah, I'm the master tactician. I think both you guys make do a great disservice to Champagne when you compare him, to various Looney Tune characters, when it's obvious that he is actually George C. Chickenhawk. And so I think if you're going to make this analogy, fucking thread the needle, okay? Like, he's clearly, come on, right? I'm George C. Chickenhawk. I am the Minister of Industry. Come on, and then you got like Galen Weston as Foghorn Leghorn. I say, quit chewing on my bones. But
shut up, boy, while I'm talking.
I say, my boys is sharp as a bowling ball. I think like a couple of things about this. It does. The one thing you can say for this approach is that it stands at least in stark contrast to the strategy that was employed for the year and a half leading up to this, which was absolutely nothing. Like, give absolutely nothing, every single possibility of working, and they have determined that was ineffective. The challenge, I think Kory was getting at it. To me, the challenge is always this. If you're going to start a fight, you have to define a win. You have to define it in advance. You don't get to define it after the fact. And right now, they're fumbling around, and there's no definition of a win. They can't get marked positively on this project. So if the win is, I'm going to bring them in and I'm going to thrash them around the room, and when they emerge, they're going to be bruised and bloodied, well, okay, but then you have to do that. If the win is, we're going to get lower prices, then those prices have to be demonstrably lowered, and you're opening yourself up to scrutiny as to whether or not you've actually met that standard. Stabilizing prices, as Jordan says, drives me bananas. It's such governmentitis. We're going to stabilize prices. They were going to rise by 33%. We've managed to keep them at 17%.
I hope you like that $9 watermelon.
It's like,
don't worry. It's going to stay $9.
So, we'll see, but I'll go really micro, and I've said this before, I'll just reiterate. To me, I think tactically, as an indication that I know they're thrashing around trying to do something, but then they're operating within the constraints that they impose on themselves. We want to do something. We need to be seen to be taking action, but they can't define a win. They can't define what the something is that would actually look good. So then they're trying to prop up the thing that they have, which is that we called them in to get a plan. They agreed to do a plan. Now, you know what? They got a plan. I can't share it with you, but they have a plan. And trust me, it's going to be a big plan. So you're always jacking up expectations. You haven't defined what the win is. But the thing that drove me crazy.
But he was holding up flyers as if he'd already won.
Yeah, no, precisely.
It's insane.
It's terrible. Really, but the real specific thing, and I know I'm just jumping.
But Canadians would be so surprised to find out he'd won this fight.
Well, no kidding. It's an absurdity. If you're going to tell people something that they don't believe, and frankly, that is not true, you're really running a huge risk. But the thing that drove me most insane about this is tactically. Some genius at some point in the beginning, before the first meeting, determined that Thanksgiving ought to be their deadline. So then they hold a fucking news conference on the eve of Thanksgiving, which is the day before everyone in the country fills their cart with groceries and looks at my God, it's the biggest purchase purchase at a grocery store people make on an annual basis. So you're encouraging people to think about it. You know how many fucking people, we can shit all over Pierre Poilievre for not being entirely fair or transparent in his $120 turkey. You know how many people I know who asked me, how much was your turkey this weekend? Everyone, every single goddamn person, independent of political stripe, interested, disinterested in politics, every motherfucking person I know asked me how much the turkey cost. That's the consequence tactically of holding a news conference to tell people that you're lowering prices the day before everybody piles their shopping cart high. It's an insane request to get tagged right on the chin. So I don't know where they're going. Maybe this plan will be great. Maybe they're going to cut prices by 25% and we'll all be eating our fists afterward.
No, it's not going to be great. It's not going to be great because
it's silly.
This government is incapable of actually taking a fight to the grocers in any serious way. And like the proof is they've left on the table options, like policy options that are much meatier politically. Things like going after anti-competitive practices. Things like, taxing excess profits that these companies have been making. Like these are all, like if you really want to send a message, like you don't use Western fucking Union. You tax people who are making unjust.
But they're in government. They're constrained. So, I agree with you. But they've constrained them. So they say, I'm going to start this fight, but I'm going to operate within the constraints that are self-imposed by being in government. So we can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And they're left with nothing but to talk it up.
Wait, Champagne fucked it up, you guys. Champagne fucked it up because it was always theater, as Kory said. It was always theater. It was nothing but theater. And he didn't do the theater.
Yeah.
Well, or he did some other kind of theater. I don't know what that was, but it was terrible. Like you don't set it up with the answer that is shit.
Well, it's bad performance art. Like it's just, it's just terrible. Anyway, but look, I don't think saying that you're going to impose big taxes on grocery retailers is going to be as a way of lowering food prices is something that's going to work very well for the NDP either. Like I don't think that intuitively rings true.
No, I think, Kory, you were hitting on it before. The government should be on the side of competition. And Jordan did mention this, right? In terms of competition law. The government should be on the side of, you know what, you guys make too much money. We're going to do something about that.
Why would we start doing competition now in Canada? It's like something that we've never really gotten into. Look, I think there are all kinds of things that the government could do around that would not be bullshit theater. Like if they wanted to take on supply management, that would lower grocery bills. If they wanted to reduce taxes on food items, that would do it. They could get rid of, say, official bilingualism, so you can get more grocery retailers in the market in places where
internal trade barriers. Why don't you do all the greatest hits, Kory?
I think what they should do. I think what they should do is bring back the red ensign. I think that will lower prices.
I have been saying that for years.
I so look forward to a conservative platform that runs against supply management and against
the Royal Canadian Navy to deliver free food to people by law.
We're going to build We're going to build condo towers at Old Fort York.
All right, this has been a great session. Let's bring in Gordon Pinson to end it for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's got a Hey You today?
Well, after that, I feel like I should do one on the loonie and the metric system, just to round out my historic beefs.
Kilogram my ass. Do I live in Italy?
Yeah. God, Anyway, I've got one just building on where we started. So to Olivia Chow and all of the municipal politicians out there, I've never understood weighing in on foreign affairs issues. like these are things that there's no particular upside to weighing in on. And if you can't say something that's going to be popular and highly beneficial to you, why open your mouth at all? And I just think that was, in this horrible weekend that we watched, I think she got the biggest F- in terms of reaction, and I think could have been avoided by just staying out of it.
Okay. Jordan, you got something?
I do. My Hey You this week is going out with gratitude to Canada's consular staff in Tel Aviv and Ramallah. So these are folks who are working literally in the crossfire of a horrific conflict right now, who were also, I think, really regrettably caught in some political crossfire this weekend when you had some pot shots from the official opposition about how diplomatic and consular staff were or weren't working. And I think it's cheap. I think it's tacky, and it's wrong. These folks are out there serving people who are in true distress, deeply affected by the events themselves. And I just want to pay you to thank them for their service.
Great. Perfect. Scott?
Well, mine also refers back to the war in Israel. And it touches on something Jordan said. My hey yous to Elon Musk. Listen, you fucking emotionally stunted little man boy. Like, get yourself together, man. Like, it's just so frustrating. Twitter was a resource. There was a blue check mark. There was a trusted verification process. There was some measure of editorial aspect. And there was, as a consequence, a level of trust. If I needed to find out in real time what was happening, I mean, make the comparison others have with Arab Spring, solely in the context of being able to turn to Twitter as a public utility to learn what was happening and have some confidence that what you were reading based on the source was valid. I don't know if the images I'm looking at are doctored and AI'd up the ass. I can't find through the fucking algorithmic crap that's thrown at me a single person I've ever heard of who I think has credibility. Like, and there's just zero sense of responsibility. The richest man in the world buys this platform, and it's of immeasurable, life-saving, literally could be of life-saving value right now, and he's turned it into some kind of broken car, and it just breaks my heart. I expect nothing from any of that, nothing from him, but my God, what a sense of loss this weekend as you're scrambling to try to find frontline news that you can trust, and you can't find it.
Right. Interesting. All right. My hey you goes out to Neil Hetherington. He's the head of the Toronto Daily Bread Food Bank. And really, my hey you goes out to all the Neil Hetheringtons and all the people working in every food bank across Canada. Neil's quoted today as saying that this weekend has been the most challenging Thanksgiving that they have ever had. Prior to the COVID pandemic, the organization saw about 65,000 client visits per month. He said that number last month was 275,000. You've got food prices, you've got a precarious work environment, and most of all, lack of decent, affordable housing. He said you put all those things together, and suddenly you can understand why people are turning to food banks. So my hey you goes out to everybody that spent this weekend providing Canadians with some measure of a decent meal to have on Thanksgiving, and do that day in, day out, every day throughout the year. And my real plea is for governments to try to eliminate these food banks. So that's my hey you. I want to thank the three of you for being with me today for another great show. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. Everybody who watched or listened, all you accursed out there, we'll be back next week with more of the curse of politics. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.